Hi, my name is David Warner Matheson, and for over 13 years I've been exploring and sharing the overwhelming evidence that the world's ancient myths from around the world are connected by an extremely ancient system. So ancient that it is already present in the myths of ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia, the earliest sacred texts from the civilizations of ancient India, ancient Greece, and is found on every inhabited continent and island around the world. This ancient system may well originate with a culture that predates any of the civilizations known to modern conventional history. It can also be shown to form the foundation for the different stories in the Bible, from Genesis all the way to the book of the Revelation. In this ancient system, the different figures in the stories and their adventures correspond directly to constellations in the night sky and relate to the heavenly cycles, including the annual cycle of the year and even the ages-long cycle of the precession of the equinoxes. Understanding this ancient system can be a powerful form of spiritual self-defense, to defend, for example, against missionaries who try to argue that the stories of the Bible are somehow true, while the ancient myths and traditions of all other cultures are not true, or who argue that those who don't take the stories in the Bible literally will go to eternal punishment in hell. Not only that, but there's evidence that this ancient worldwide system was given to us as a gift to help us to understand ourselves and to use our gifts to their full potential. And not only are the myths beneficial to the lives of individual men and women, but the ancient system seems also to be designed to give us a pattern for societies in which men and women can have the opportunity to live up to their divinely given potential. As an example of the evidence that the myths around the world are based on a common celestial system, I often use images from around the world showing figures associated with a specific constellation, starting with the powerful god Zeus of ancient Greece, shown here in the artwork on this vase, which dates to around 540 BC. Here Zeus is shown in a battle with one of his arch enemies, the monster Typhon, who's shown with a torso of a man, and from the legs down, or from the waist down, legs that are made of two serpents. Now, I know I've shown this on a lot of other videos and podcasts, but I'm setting this up because today we're going to be looking at a god, a kami-san, from ancient Japan, still worshipped, a mountain god who you'll see after you see some of these features, you'll recognize some of these features in a god of ancient Japan. So let's take a look quickly at some of the evidence that gods and figures in myth around the world are based on this common ancient worldwide system. So looking at this vase from ancient Greece, we can see this vase is still found to this day. This vase can be seen in a museum in Munich in Germany, and it's piece number 596. You can go take a look at it today. But in this vase we see Zeus in his confrontation with Typhon, a very powerful enemy of the Olympian gods, and we know it's Zeus because the ancient artist or someone associated with the ancient artist has written the name of Zeus right there. Those are the Greek letters Z, E, U, and S in the Greek alphabet in ancient way of writing. So we know that's Zeus with the thunderbolt. Some of the paint has flaked off over the centuries, so I'm going to fill in his purple shawl that's draped over his shoulders and his deep lunge position of his legs. And you can find this image in drawings by artists. This is from Wikimedia Commons, so this is not drawn by me. This is what we believe that the ancient scene on this vase used to look like. You can see Zeus in this deep knee bend, and what I've shown many times before is the god Zeus, the thunder god, the sky god, the god of the heavens, the most powerful god of the Olympian gods of ancient Greece, is associated with a specific constellation, and that constellation is the constellation that we know of as the constellation Hercules. It doesn't mean that the constellation Hercules only plays the role of Hercules. These different constellations play many different figures in the myths of one culture as well as around the world. So in the myths of ancient Greece, this constellation does play the hero Heracles, known to the Romans as Hercules, but it also plays the most powerful god, just as Heracles is the most powerful mortal man or demigod. His father is Zeus. Heracles is associated with this constellation, but his father Zeus is also associated with this very same constellation. The constellation we know of as Hercules. Look at the outline of Hercules. I'm going to briefly show some of these distinctive characteristics because it's going to be important to what I'm going to talk about today. If this is review for you, bear with me, but this evidence is just amazing. And it really shows that we're talking about an ancient worldwide system. And I would just mention the constellation Hercules is not that easy to find in the night sky. Even if you know what you're looking for, it takes time to be able to pick out the outline that I'm showing here. This isn't just, oh, well, it's natural that people around the world would connect the stars this way. No, it's not natural at all. Go out and try and find Hercules. It takes time and practice to draw the lines connect the right stars to see Hercules. This is not something that is just jumps out at you. And yet around the world, as we'll see, this set of stars was envisioned this way and associated with distinctive characteristics that are common to cultures on different continents in different centuries around the world. So let's take a look. We see this extended rear leg that's part of the outline of this constellation, and then look at the outline of Zeus in the artist's depiction from 540 BC. And we see this deep lunge posture with the front knee deeply bent, and there it is in the constellation, there it is in the artwork. He's brandishing a powerful weapon. This weapon shows up in different ways in different myths. The hero Heracles or Hercules is most commonly depicted or described as carrying a big club, but you can see that also could look like a sword. In the case of Zeus, it's the powerful thunderbolt weapon. And then he's got an outstretched other arm. The constellation itself doesn't always play a male figure, but in this case, Zeus is the most powerful male god in the Olympic pantheon. But the outstretched arm is clearly visible in the stars of the constellation, and the artist has shown this distinctly outstretched arm on the god Zeus reaching towards Typhon. Now, who's Typhon? Typhon, in this depiction and in some of the descriptions in ancient myth, has the upper torso of a man, and then down below the hips branches out into, instead of legs, two powerful serpent coils there. And right below the constellation Hercules in the sky, there's a constellation known as Ophiuchus. Again, not necessarily that easy to find unless you practice and go out and know where to look and outline the constellations. And yet around the world, Ophiuchus is one of the most important constellations in myth around the world. Now notice Hercules is directly above Ophiuchus. Zeus is battling with Typhon. And Ophiuchus, the name of this constellation means the serpent holder, has this central body. It looks kind of like a tombstone or an obelisk. It's a rectangle, an oblong rectangle with a triangle on top. And then on either side are two halves of a serpent that Ophiuchus is carrying. Or it could be two serpents. And then down below are two legs. And Ophiuchus is a very versatile constellation, shows up in myth in many different ways, but the legs of Ophiuchus, they're very faint, and in fact, if you just blot those out, you can see why Typhon, who is associated with Ophiuchus, I'm arguing, and battles with Zeus, who's associated with Hercules. Typhon has a torso of a man, but from the waist down, two serpents. Can you see the two serpent legs coming out of the torso on Ophiuchus? There's the two serpent legs of Typhon, there's the two serpent legs of Ophiuchus, and if you've ever seen the symbol of Starbucks with the mermaid with two tails, often mermaids would be drawn with two tails. This is from a woodcut illustration from Germany in 1565, and they show a mermaid and she has two tails, and you can clearly see that she is associated with Ophiuchus. From the torso down, it branches into two fish tails, and if you look, here's one fish tail. Look on Ophiuchus. The serpent half, we usually call that the serpent's tail on Ophiuchus. On that side, her arm is kind of towards the top of the tail. As you can see, in Ophiuchus, the stars themselves match up. And then we call this side of Ophiuchus the serpent head. You can see there's a little triangular head. That's usually called the serpent head. It's on the west side of the constellation Ophiuchus. But look at where her hand is, down closer to, you might call it the thigh of the tail there. And on Ophiuchus itself, one hand is higher, one hand is lower. It matches up perfectly with this woodcut. Clearly, this depiction of a mermaid with two tails has a connection to the celestial outline of Ophiuchus. But that's what gives rise to Typhon, and Zeus battles Typhon in the ancient Greek myth. So here's the constellation Hercules, there's Zeus, and I'm going to show you other figures around the world who are also associated with the same constellation and have some of the very same characteristics as Zeus, the thunder god of ancient Greece. Here we have a god from the Maya. It's found on this artwork is found on a tumbler, like almost a coffee mug or a cylindrical cylinder for holding liquids, from the 7th or 8th century AD or CE, so well before Columbus. This is a Maya drinking vessel, and on it is artwork depicting the god Chak. And Chak is a rain god. He's a rain god of the Maya, and we'll see the exact same characteristics as Zeus, the thunder god of ancient Greece. And then over on the other side of Zeus, I've put a piece of artwork, a photograph from Angkor Wat, but these are depicting gods and mythical scenes from ancient India, from the Vedas. And here we have, it's actually the god Vishnu is in the center, but above Vishnu, right there, is the god Indra, and Indra is a rain god. Just like Chak is a rain god, just like Zeus is a thunder god and a storm god. And if you look at the outline of Indra, I'll make it a little bit larger, you can clearly see, again, the very same outline, the distinctive posture that we just saw with Zeus. And also I'm going to call attention to this sash. So the actual art depictions show characteristics that are consistent around the world. See the sash I've highlighted in green there on Indra? It's coming out from the waist of the god. Not only that, he has a kind of instead of having a full beard like Zeus, if you look at the constellation Hercules, it has a square-shaped head. If you look at the headgear, Indra is wearing a hat that kind of gives the head a square-shaped appearance, and we'll see that again, so that's important to take note of. And then in the figure of Chak, he also doesn't have a full beard like Zeus, but you can see how Zeus, the full beard, is reminiscent of the square-shaped head of In the case of Chak, it's upswept hair that gives kind of a larger than normal appearance to the head, but again, we have that very distinctive body posture. It's the same as Indra, it's the same as Zeus, and it's the same as the constellation in the heavens. And these are all rain gods, sky gods. They all carry powerful weapons. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But they also all have this kind of a sash. There's Chalk. He has a loincloth around his waist, and it has a long tail with kind of almost a tuft at the end. And I'll point that out and why that matches up with the stars of the heavens. But I'm also going to point out that Zeus, he doesn't actually have a sash coming off of his waist, but he's wearing this shawl, and the shawl ends in two little tails right there, but in very much the same position as the end of the sash of Indra or the sash of Chalk, and that's because of a distinctive star in the sky near the constellation Hercules. And if you look at the central figure of the stars of Hercules, the constellation, right above the hip is this very bright star. That's the fifth brightest fixed star in the sky. That is the star Vega, which is located in a constellation called Lyra, which is the lyre, which is a stringed instrument. It's kind of like a small harp. It's right next to Hercules in the sky. It even has two little harp strings, the way it's outlined here. But because that bright star is right off the hip of the constellation Hercules, that's why you get these, I would argue, sashes on these sky gods who are associated with Hercules. They have a sash that culminates in a tuft or a point or a bulb or something that indicates the location of the star Vega. So let's just take a brief closer look at the god Chalk in the Maya cup that comes from the 7th or 8th century CE. You can find this cup in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. That's all the information on the lower right part of the screen from the Met Museum in New York. And if you look at this outline, we'll see all those same distinctive features that line up with the constellation Hercules. First of all, this is the god Chalk. He is a rain god from the Maya, and he's in that same lunge posture with the heel raised, just like we saw in the constellation itself, just like we saw with Zeus. He is brandishing a weapon that he holds in one hand over his back. In this case, the weapon is an axe. There's the axe head. I put an arrow so you can really see what the weapon looks like. And then he also has, just like we saw with Zeus, his other arm, a forward-reaching arm, outstretched arm. And in this case, it's grasping some kind of a disc. And archaeologists don't know what that disc is. If you read different commentaries on this Maya drinking vessel, but we'll see what it is. It's celestial in nature. Until academia starts to acknowledge that these are all celestial figures, which they haven't yet, they won't be able to figure out what that disc is, but I'm going to show it in a moment. And then he also has this loincloth with a tuft, like we pointed out before. I'll just outline it there. And there's the tuft at the end that lines up with the star Vega. And then let's just fade out the outline so you can see how well it lines up with the constellation Hercules. I'm not modifying the stars of the constellation Hercules at all. This is the outline of Hercules in the sky. Let's see how well it lines up with the constellation Hercules, that artwork of the sky god, the rain god, Chalk of the Maya. There's the outline of the constellation Hercules that we saw before, and I'm going to fade in a moment the Maya drinking vessel. But before I do that, on the other side of Lyra and Vega, we have a constellation very bright. It's a beautiful constellation called Corona Borealis. That is the northern crown. It looks like a crown, and it's an arc shape. And you can imagine, if you use a little bit of imagination, one more line connecting that outstretched arm of the constellation Hercules to the arc of Corona Borealis. So in many myths, you'll see a Hercules figure grasping an arc of some sort. And here we have in this Maya drinking cup a Hercules, a god who's related to the constellation Hercules. You can see it by his posture, reaching forward with his forward arm and grasping a disc that's associated with the constellation Corona Borealis. So just look at how the lunging posture, I haven't altered the artwork on the vase, I haven't altered the stars in the sky. That is the constellation Hercules, that is the god Chalk, and the match is just perfect, basically. And the outstretched arm is grasping a disc right in the correct position for the Corona Borealis. And then, as we've talked about, that tuft on the loincloth points right to the position of the star Vega. It's not exact in the artwork, but all these different figures around the world who are associated with the constellation Hercules have this shawl or tuft or kind of sash coming out, going in that direction, indicating the star Vega. Sometimes it's a scabbard of a sword with a ball on the end of it. I can show you other artwork from different centuries. It's just undeniable, really, that we're dealing with something that is worldwide. And I'll just emphasize one more time, the outline of Hercules is not something that just jumps out at you. Sometimes people say, well, it's just natural that myths around the world would be based on the stars. Everyone has the stars. Well, first of all, it's not just natural that myths around the world are based on the stars. That is a very interesting development that we find over and over in culture after culture. But second of all, it is not just automatic that cultures are going to draw the stars or outline the constellations in the same way. And yet here we have clear evidence that it's happening around the world. And not only that, but the figures associated with this particular constellation are consistent across cultures. It's a sky god. It's a powerful god. A lot of times this god will have a jovial or a jolly kind of a temperament like Zeus or Jove, but also a quick temper. And that's also consistent with the Norse god Thor, who's also associated with the same constellation. He loves a good party, but he has a very short temper. It's a consistent pattern of characteristics around the world in cultures that you wouldn't think would be associated with one another. And today we're going to talk about one more. But before we do, I just want to add a little bit more evidence, because this is important. We are all probably familiar with the characteristics of the hero Heracles or Hercules. He wears a lion's skin. So not only does he have a full beard that makes his head look square, but he wears a lion's skin with the head up over his head, makes his head look even more square. And so he's associated with the same constellation. You can see it. Look, he's brandishing a weapon over his head. He's also got this outstretched arm, just like we saw before with the artwork of Zeus. He also has the tail of the lion skin. We'll look at that in a minute. But notice right above the outstretched arm, I moved the arrow up. What is that? It was the crest of his opponent's helmet. In this case, it's one of the 12 labors of Hercules or Heracles. He's fighting the Amazons, the Amazonian warrior women, but she's wearing a helmet with a distinctive crest. What did we just see above the outstretched arm when we were looking at Chalk? Corona Borealis. Right there above the outstretched arm, there's the arc in the artwork. This is from ancient Greece, not from the Americas, the Maya, of course, what today we call Central America primarily. And look at that. And sometimes Heracles is even depicted as grasping that crest, just like Chalk was grasping the disc. Look, you can see in this ancient vase, again, it's Hercules. This time he's actually grasping the crest, and you can see it right there. Or in this one, again, that's Hercules or Heracles from an ancient Greek artwork on a vase, and he's grasping the crest right there. And I'll make it a little bigger in a moment, but also notice we've got the pommel of his sword on the figure on the left, right where we would expect to find the star Vega. Or in the figure on the right, he's got the distinctive lion tail. You often see that in depictions of Hercules or Heracles. Not only has he got the skin with the head of the lion over his head, but the tail will be pointing off towards the general direction of the star Vega. So I'll just make that crest a little bit bigger so that you can see that, yes, in some artwork, Hercules or Heracles is actually grasping the crest of the helmet right there. So now let's go to Japan. And here we have a mountain god, a powerful god, a kami of the mountains, whose name is Zao Gongen. And this is a piece of artwork that is found again in the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art. So this is the description in the Met of this statue of the god Zao Gongen. And it says, Zao Gongen is a rare example of a purely Japanese deity in the Buddhist pantheon. Many of the religious practices associated with Zao took place in remote temples deep in the mountains. Through these rites, mountain ascetics, Yamabushi, who were or are practitioners of Shugendo, attempted to appropriate for themselves the sheer physical power of the deities. This powerful icon in a demon-quelling aspect was made for the Koshoji temple in Kyoto. So if you look at that, you can immediately see, there's some very interesting characteristics that we have observed before. Now, in this case, the deep lunge is very pronounced. The forward knee is very high, raised up very high. He is lunging in the opposite direction from the constellation in the night sky, but artists will often invert. They take artistic license. He's got one outstretched arm and then one arm down by his hip. It's actually in a mudra or hand position that represents a sword. So that's interesting based on what we've seen in the heavens. But sometimes that other hand will be holding up a special type of thunderbolt, as we'll see in a moment. Now, I'm going to bring in a web page that also talks about Zao Gongen. Actually gives us a lot more information than that little blurb from the Met Museum. This is from a wonderful website at onmarkproductions.com, and the author of this website, Mark Shoemaker, has lived in Japan for decades. He's studied different aspects of Japanese culture, and he has this very extensive website that is focused primarily on Japanese sculpture and iconography, especially of Buddhist deities in Japan. So the statues and the iconography associated with the different deities. He has an alphabetical listing of deity after deity, and if you get to the page on Zao Gongen, you will see this wealth of information about Zao Gongen, and we can see that Zao Gongen is a thunderbolt holder. He holds, as it says here, the Vajra. The Vajra is a thunderbolt. It's the name of a thunderbolt in Sanskrit and in the Vedas. That thunderbolt, that Vajra, interestingly enough, in India is most associated with Indra. We saw Indra earlier. Indra, the rain god, is the holder of the Vajra in some of the most ancient Vedas. But Zao Gongen, who's associated with mountains, is also associated with the thunderbolt, and he's the holder of the Vajra. And we'll see some depictions of that, but there's one right over here. That's Zao Gongen. Again, you can see the upraised front knee, and then he's holding a Vajra. That's a traditional outline of a Vajra, and we'll see a few more if you can't see it very well because of all the fire. But another aspect that's important is he's a mountain god. He's the major deity, or one of the major kami of Japan's Shugendo sect. It's a practice of going up into the mountains to meet with the divine, to get in touch with your deeper self, to shed away some of the different doubts and accumulations that we have, and to get in touch with who we really are. And by going up into the mountains, doing difficult climbs over rocks, meditating under waterfalls, walking over fire, and meeting with the gods, the practitioners of Shugendo can get in touch with their deeper self. And here are some other images from that same website, On Mark Productions. This one, you can see there is a Vajra right here. You can see again that this iconography, this statuary of Zao Gongen, has that upraised knee and the lunging posture. And in this case, that upraised hand is holding the Vajra. Also note that the hair is upswept, which is what we saw with Chalk, the rain god, in that cylindrical art tumbler with the artwork from the Maya. The upswept hair makes that kind of extra large square-shaped head, or I would argue that matches up with the constellation. Now, the Japanese word for the Vajra is Kongosho, and there's the characters. The first character is the symbol for gold, the second character is for stiff, and the third character is a baton. So it's a club or a thunderbolt weapon that's gold and powerful. And here's another depiction of Zao Gongen, and you can see the Vajra. This is the characteristic outline of the Vajra in India and in Tibet and in the depictions of Zao Gongen. And he's again on top of a mountain peak there, and I'll show one more. There's a Vajra. He's on top of the mountain peak, and you can see that deep lunge posture, and you can see the interesting headgear with the upswept hair, which we're seeing around the world. It matches up with the constellation Hercules. I'll show one more. This is very interesting because this one kind of also has a sash arching over Zao Gongen and the Vajra. And I'm going to again bring in the constellations of the night sky so you can see what we're talking about. Look at the distinctive posture. Look at the upraised arm with the Vajra, and then look at the swept up hair that we've seen before. And now I'll outline again the constellation Hercules in the night sky, directly above Ophiuchus. And why is it important that he's directly above Ophiuchus? Well, in the story of Zeus fighting Typhon, I didn't mention, but Zeus threw thunderbolts at Typhon, and they didn't kill Typhon. Typhon was so powerful, he could absorb the thunderbolts or bounce them off, and he didn't. Unlike so many other of Zeus's adversaries, the thunderbolt did not defeat Typhon. So Zeus had to slam a mountain down on top of Typhon. So Typhon, as we saw, was associated with Ophiuchus. Ophiuchus is also associated with mountains in many different myths. And you can see the actual outline of Ophiuchus looks like a mountain. And notice Zao Gongen, he is depicted as standing on top of a mountain. Not exactly standing, lunging on top of a mountain. Look at Ophiuchus. Look at the constellation Hercules. There's the top of Ophiuchus. That's why it's a mountain, at mountaintop. In the Zeus and Typhon story, Zeus has to slam a mountain down on top of Typhon. Look, there's the mountain. There's Zao Gongen on top of the mountain in that distinctive lunging posture of Hercules, the constellation, with the distinctive square-shaped head, raising the powerful thunderbolt weapon. And interestingly, in this, there's this sash around and arcing over the god. Zao Gongen has this sash, and notice on one end it's got a kind of an arc shape. There's an arc shape on the side of the sash that's on the upraised knee side of Zao Gongen. So on that side above the upraised knee there is an arc shape, and then it arcs all the way over and comes down to the tail of the sash branches into two. Where have we seen that before? Didn't we see that with the shawl of the god Zeus in the very first artwork that I showed? Now, remember, in front of Hercules, we have the corona borealis that's on the side of the upraised knee of the constellation Hercules. And in some myths, a Hercules figure will pull a cloak up over his head. You can see that in the Odyssey a few different times, and I talk about it in one of my books. But can you see how this shawl that starts with an arc goes all the way to the end? It arches over the god associated with the constellation Hercules, and it ends up in two tails. The two tails, I argued with the Zeus shawl, have to do with those two strings of Lyra, the lyre. The different shawls or sashes or lion tails associated with figures of Hercules end up at the star Vega with the constellation Lyra over there, but it actually has two little strings that in the constellation itself suggest the twin tails that we see here. So this is very clear evidence that we are dealing with a system that is worldwide. And you know, I didn't even know about Zao Gongen when I was doing my first work on seeing the evidence that, for example, the god Zeus, the thunder god of ancient Greece, is associated with the constellation Hercules. The evidence is overwhelming that Zeus is associated with the constellation Hercules, that chalk is associated with the constellation Hercules. But this is a pattern that is found around the world. It is worldwide. It is some kind of an ancient system, and here we find it operating in this powerful, very important mountain god of Japan, Zao Gongen. And you can see all the characteristics and why he's a mountain god and how this system should unite us around the world, because it shows that we have some kind of an inheritance that was given to all the different nations of the world, and it takes on different forms based on the different cultures, but there is some kind of common inheritance at work here, and it is not just that these coincidentally arose independently, because these are very specific and very almost obscure details that we would not expect to just coincidentally arise over and over again and have these same kind of characteristics to the deities or gods or kami that are associated with these specific constellations, and yet that's exactly what we find. And so it's just an extremely powerful example, yet another powerful example, and I'll just conclude by showing a few more connections, how this should unite us around the world. This is an ancient worldwide system. Here's back to this wonderful website from Onmark Productions, some attributes of Zao Gongen, and I'll show it a little bit larger. He is sometimes depicted with a lion skin belt. I mean, that's amazing right there. That's why I put in all that preamble and showed some examples from the hero Heracles of ancient Greece. And not only that, but you may have noticed, he has a grimacing face. So sometimes he's in a very grimacing face, and sometimes his eyes are staring very widely. And I've talked about this before. I discuss it in my 2016 book about the star myths of ancient Greece. The haka of the Maori is started traditionally on one knee. You see the same lunging posture, and you also see the grimacing face, the staring eyes, sometimes sticking out of the tongue, and look, making the powerful kind of thunderbolt weapon with one arm. It is a dance that is associated with the characteristics of the constellation Hercules and with the god Tiki or Tiki. You can see this is a Maori carving from one of the marae. It's a sacred carving, and you can see the staring eyes, the grimacing mouth, the protruding tongue, and if you look, that carving itself is in the lunging posture, raising a club over the head, and then the other arm is down at the hip, very much like Zao Gongen. This is a worldwide system. We see it around the world, and it is a very prevalent, distinctive pattern that I know I show some of these examples a lot, but I'm now connecting with other cultures that conventional academia would not say that the Maya have anything in common with the Maori or with the kami of the mountains of Japan, or with Zeus for that matter, or with Indra from ancient India. This is a worldwide system. It shows that the conventional academic model of history is gravely flawed. It needs some major reworking. And I'll just show one more example from the Dresden Codex. This is one of the very few surviving Maya codexes that survived the absolute obliteration, deliberate destruction of the ancient wisdom when the conquistadors and literalist Christians from Europe in the 1500s, primarily from Spain, came over and just destroyed the ancient wisdom that was preserved by the Maya civilization. But this is one of the codexes that made its way back to Spain and then ended up in Dresden in modern-day Germany. And in this particular codex, which is from around 1000 to 1100, that's when they think this codex was painted, well before Columbus, there's this god right here. Let's just take a closer look at him. You can see he's in the same, I don't know who this god is. If I could read the Maya Codex, maybe I'd learn more about him, but I can just look at it and see this is clearly a thunderbolt-wielding god with a headgear that makes his head look larger and more square, and he's in that distinctive lunging posture that we saw with the god Zeus. And in fact, their thunderbolt weapons look very similar. Look at the thunderbolt weapon on the Maya Codex, and let's just move it over. It's a Vajra. It's a thunderbolt weapon. We're seeing it again and again around the world. This is not just coincidence. This isn't just, well, humans naturally imagine a thunderbolt this way. This is some kind of an ancient system, the memory of which appears to be preserved around the world as part of the sacred traditions of different cultures on every continent and in the islands, the inhabited continents and islands of our earth. And it's very much like a Vajra. All the distinctive characteristics are there. I've even pointed out, I'm not sure what kind of ornament this is coming off the hip of the deity in the Dresden Codex, but it kind of matches right up with the location of Vega again that we've been pointing out. And there's the twin tails on the sash of Zeus, which are very reminiscent of what we saw in the statuary of Zao Gongen. So that evidence shows that we're all connected, and it's the same for the stories of the Bible. So when literalism goes around the world and says, our stories are historical and true, and your stories are mythological and false or even evil, that is based on a tremendous misinterpretation. Understanding this system provides a level of spiritual self-defense from that kind of mistaken activity. And it's very clear that the world's ancient myths are part of a precious inheritance, and as I talk about in other places, therefore our benefit, both on an individual level and on a societal level. And I would argue that they are very important tools for our lives today in the situation that we find ourselves in, both on an individual level and on a societal level. Thank you so much for listening.